What I'm proposing is think of a way that what can you do that you would be ready to survive on your own for 72 hours. Okay. So what does that even mean? Okay. For now, I'm going to just kind of flash through this again. If you think about power, shelter, heat, fuel, phone, and charger, radio, internet, food, water, entertainment. And then I did books across the bottom of that. And all of those could fit into your 4 choices of stay at home, you're stuck on the road, you're forced to evacuate, and a bug out bag. Okay. But just think about it. It's like, okay, wherever you are, in the world, in your life right now, we're in the lockdown, so you got time to think about it maybe. You think, okay, right now, do I have enough food and water for the next 3 days where I wouldn't have to go somewhere to get it? You could sleep in your car a few days. Do you need coffee in the morning? Well, if you watch this channel, you probably do. I've got probably 4 different ways I can make coffee if I needed to, And if it really got bad, I'd go around and start burning old bushes. But I haven't got to that point yet. But, I've got propane stove, butane stove, got the little canned heat plus electric. So if solar worked, I could do it with electric. Hopefully, you get some kind of ideas out of this that would get you through, right? And that's kind of the point, is we're not going to rebuild civilization from here, but there is a lot of times where if you could make it through the next 72 hours, life will get back to normal, or it'll give you time to think of a better way. That's a lot of it. You got this thing happens, your whole day is disrupted. Maybe it's just you. Maybe everybody else is fine, but just you. Your power gets shut off because you forgot to pay the bill. Been there, and it's 3 days till payday. Well, could you live without power for 3 days? Maybe that's all you need. You just like, oh, fine, hope you don't have too much meat in the freezer that's going to melt, All right, here we go. It's about 8 o'clock in the morning on the 12th of February, 2021. It is just a gorgeous day outside. So, I had an idea for a script. Let me see if we can do this without knocking everything over. Oh, that's really good. It's actually not terrible. Close. That's a bit crooked. That seems better, huh? The correct way to do this is to not wear a hat, but I'm looking right at the sun, and honestly, it's just too nice to move right now, so we'll deal with it. So, that's what we look like. Oh yeah, I did cut my hair yesterday. I don't know, it's one of those things, right? It would be just really nice to go to a place and get your hair cut, but since we're still kind of in lockdown, and a lot of times I would shave my head myself anyway because, $15 or whatever, right? Cheers. All right, so what's going on anyway? So one of the videos, I guess the last one before, I don't remember. One of the videos, somebody commented, "Hey, get ready for snow." I'm like, what? What do you mean snow? Yesterday, I walked around in shorts most of the day. It was just gorgeous. It was like 70 in the house. It was crazy. I'm starting to notice, okay, so I finally insulated the house, the front half of the house. So where I actually live, the ceiling is insulated, the walls are insulated. Most of the rest of the building, the back half, is storage and the tinker shop. That I insulated the walls, but I never got around to doing the ceiling. I do have some of the insulation for the ceiling, but not enough to finish it. And I don't know. I know you're supposed to. I just hate insulation. So I just haven't done it. Anyway, so I noticed yesterday for the first time, I was getting a lot of radiating heat from the roof down. So the back half was just really warm, in February. And this is the thing is I came out here this morning, finished eating my breakfast because it's cold in the house, but it's warmer out here. And I mentioned this in the last video. This is just one of those weird things that you might think about. I don't run a furnace. I don't have a furnace. So for me to heat the house, I got to, burn propane for a little propane heater or something. Because usually in the morning is when you need heat. I don't have enough solar in the morning to run an electric heater. If I ended up with a really clear, cold day, I could run an electric heater off of solar. Okay. That doesn't usually happen though, because if it's really clear, it'll be warm and I'll just sit outside and warm up, or I'll sit in the bus. I do that quite often. I've got more windows in the bus, and so I just sit in the driver's seat of the bus. I have a desk built there. That's where some of the other videos were shot. So I would just sit there in the bus and I get the sun shining on me. Even on a windy, cold day, the sun shines and you feel pretty good. So enough of that preamble. Here we are, 7 minutes into it already. Sorry. So I made a script again. This is going to be the 72-hour video. All right. I was really excited about this as an idea about 4 years ago, probably, before I even lived out here. All right. I was trying to think of like a platform, like if you're like a prepper, or if you're a survivalist, or if your thing is first aid, or if your thing is solar electricity or electric cars, if you're going to have a YouTube channel or a blog or a website, it's really handy if you can have one thing that everything else can kind of plug into, right? So I was kind of thinking about that, and one idea that had come up, if you have, let's start with like a natural disaster, okay? Hurricanes or earthquakes or, something like that, right? If something big happens, your part of the world could be massively disrupted, okay? You might be on your own for a few days, okay? So what I was kind of looking at is like, okay, let's say there is a hurricane, the grid is wiped out. Roads are washed out, there's flooding, you're stuck at home, you can't go anywhere, and nobody can get to you. Like Hurricane Katrina, they had people in boats going around picking up people that were stuck on their rooftop because the entire city was flooded, and their only option when they realized it, because it happened pretty fast, they all crawled up on the roof. And now you're sitting there on the roof. Okay, that's pretty much an extreme example, but life now, extreme examples are becoming more regular. So it's something to think about. Now, obviously, if the house flooded and you're on your roof, that's pretty unlikely. But there is still flooding that happens. Okay. Well, let's say maybe it wasn't quite that bad. But let's say, like where I live, on the years where it rains a lot, the road washes out. And there's some days where you just can't get to town. You're stuck. All right. Or if you lived in northern climates where there's massive snow, you might have a situation where it might be a few days before the snowplow clears your road and you just can't get out. Now, if you live in the city, that's less likely, but sometimes, you'd see like New York City would just get hammered with snow, and they would have more snow than they could deal with for a few days. So it happens. Okay. My reason for saying that, today's the 12th of February. Valentines Day, the 14th, we're supposed to get snow here today, on the 14th, right? So on the 14th, we're going to get snow. Yesterday, I was wearing shorts. Today is pretty warm so far. If the wind doesn't blow, I'll probably get to wear shorts again. And then 2 days from now, it'll be the forecast that I saw, the high will be about 35 degrees. Right? And I'm like, what? It wasn't even low of 35 degrees the last couple of days. I was like, I think it was maybe 40 degrees this morning when I stuck my head out here, and now it's going to be 35 high Yikes. Okay. That happens. I talked a while ago about the exceptional days. I actually put my propane heater away last week. I hadn't used it for a few weeks. Yeah, I'm going to have to dig it out again. What I'm proposing is think of a way that what can you do that you would be ready to survive on your own for 72 hours. Okay. So what does that even mean? Okay. There's a couple options. Like, for instance, we'll say California when they had the wildfires. You might have 1 hour warning where you have to be out of your property because the fire is coming. Okay. So you're forced out. So what I wrote down is you have, like, say, 4 options. You've got stay at home. You could shelter in place, is what we used to say. So you're stuck on your property. You're stuck in your apartment. You can't leave. Okay. So you need enough where you are to shelter in place. You can just hunker down and you'll be okay. All right. Or you could be on the road. So this is something to think about. I've had times where I was driving somewhere and I broke down. You're sitting there. Okay. Do you have any drinking water in your car so that when you're on the side of the road, if you could just drink some water, your life would be better. Okay. So we'll say stay at home, shelter in place. On the road in your car, you're forced out. That's the third option. And then a bug out bag was the fourth thing I wrote down there. Okay. So in each of those 4 scenarios, we'll say there's a list of things that you might have that would make your life easier. And this is the thing is, if you can survive the first 72 hours, usually by the 4th day, power is turned back on. They've cleared the roads. They've rebuilt the roads. They're able to get to you. Okay. So the trick is just honestly, even without food and water, you will not die in 4 days. You'll be really uncomfortable and unhappy. But people survive for a week, right? It's just not pleasant. Okay. So this is kind of the thing is what could you do to be ready for that? And I remember one of my friends on Facebook, I think it was one of my Navy buddies, but I don't remember which one, was saying, think of now, and this was when they were stuck at home, I think, or something like that. All of the things that for $5 or $10 each you could have bought at the last gas station that would have made your life easier, right? And you're like, yeah, but you didn't think of it, like one of those space blankets or, extra mittens or another gallon of drinking water or a couple Cliff bars or a Snickers bar, that kind of thing, right? Just little things that would make it just a little bit better. Okay. So when I was in the Navy, I was part of a security team that would come in, like say if there was a plane crash and they needed somebody to go out and secure the site so people didn't steal the parts, we could be activated on 30 minutes notice. So in my truck, I always had a backpack that had 3 or 4 days worth of clothes and uniforms and a canteen and my first aid kit and a couple things like that. Usually we could be deployed quickly and then they would bring a truck out with more supplies for us, but we might be in a situation where they would have us either camping at the crash site, for example, or they also had like a barracks on the base that they could put us in because a lot of us lived out in town. So to make it easier, they just have us all bunk on the base. Okay. So we had our bug out bag. I'm going to start with that because that kind of applies to the other ones. So within the bug out bag, let's say you had 3 days worth of socks, underwear, t-shirts, maybe a 1 or 2 clean pair of pants, right? If you're camping, you could wear your same pair of jeans for 2 or 3 days if you had clean underwear. Okay, think of it like that. And then you might think, okay, what is your local environment? Are you looking at, is it going to be freezing or is it going to be hot? Or maybe, you could have a summer bag and a winter bag. Do you have rain? A set of rain gear can make all the difference in the world. I mean, if you're, I remember one time I got stuck in my truck. I was out in It was in San Diego, but it was one of those times where it actually rained, and I got my truck down at a low point, and I buried it. It was just sunk. And I dug for a few hours in the rain, couldn't get out. Finally, I just crawled in the truck, slept, worked on it the next day, and then walked out and found a phone back before cell phones. Finally, I got somebody to come out and help me. By then, the sun had come out, the water dried up, and it wasn't too bad. But I had my bug out bag in the truck with me. So when I got tired of digging, I just kind of like, all right, put the shovel in the back of the truck, stood out in the rain, let the water wash the mud off of me for a while, and then crawled in the truck. The truck was still running, so I started it up, ran the heater for a while, and then one piece at a time started taking off all my wet, dirty clothes and throwing them on the floor on the passenger side, pulling out clean clothes out of the bag. And I could sleep pretty good because then I was in fairly clean, dry clothes. It was nice. Okay, so that's just kind of an example. One thing, though, the bug-out bag, it has to be something you could carry. Okay. If you have 40 pounds worth of gear, unless you're really serious into backpacking, that maybe isn't very practical. So, for example, let's say you had... One option is you're by yourself, and the other option is maybe you got, you and your wife and your 2 kids. Okay. So now you got to be thinking about if you got kids, you might end up carrying the kids. So just kind of keep that in mind. But how far could you walk carrying your bag? Okay. Let's say, for example, after Hurricane Katrina, I jumped in my van and I drove from Washington State all the way down to eventually, I was down in Baton Rouge and also Memphis, Tennessee. And I interviewed people. That was the Survivor Stories video. That's on my channel. I'll try to remember to put a link to that. So that's where some of this came from. I was talking to people. Some people had the resources to get out of New Orleans or Nolens or however they say it. So some people had the resources, they just jumped in their car and they left. Okay. Other people either didn't have the resources or just chose to stay thinking, well, it's the government, they don't know what they're talking about, we'll be fine, because that happens. Right. Anyway, so a couple of the people were driving, everything's fine, they're in a fairly new vehicle, and the thing just quits running on the side of the road, right? They didn't run out of gas, they just quit running. Now what do you do, right? So they're halfway evacuated and they're stuck on the side of the road, Now your option was, let's say you were in a flood zone where you're actually going to get flooded. You might be looking at, well, okay, my Escalade is now going to be a submarine. Okay, I can't stay in it. Pick up your kids, grab your backpacks, start walking. That might be your best choice. Right? Maybe somebody will stop and help you. But what could you carry, right? So maybe you could divide the backpack up or something like that. Okay, so think about, some things don't necessarily apply, but okay, I'm going to go down the list again. So we got power. Okay. I'm living off grid, so I'm on my own for power all the time. So that's not a big deal. I'm used to that. But if you're sitting there at home and your power goes out, if you're in, say like when I lived in Austin, if your power goes off, you lost air conditioning. Your life is pretty miserable for the next few days, okay? Or it's cold if you have electric heat. If you lost power, you're going to be really uncomfortable, okay? Last video or the one before it, I mentioned the Blue Eddy. This is a self-contained battery pack that has an inverter in it. It could run some things for some time. Okay. It maybe wouldn't be the best choice to run an electric heater. You might get maybe 2 hours of heat out of it, for example. And it depends on which one you got. There's a little tiny one. There's a medium-sized one like the one I got. And it's not mine. I'm borrowing it for testing. But then there's a bigger one that could run longer. Okay. If you thought you were only going to be out of power for a day, that might be a really good option. It can be solar charged also. So if you had a solar panel that you could put out in the sun when the sun came back out. You could recharge it and then use it for lights at night. Okay, so that's an option. And it is portable. You can pick it up and carry it. Now, this is not the kind of thing that you would pick it up and carry it 20 miles. You could carry it from your upstairs apartment down to the grass to put your solar panels out, but you wouldn't want to carry it 5 miles. It's heavy. Although, if you had a cart, this might be an option. So that's something to think about. Okay, that's power. You could have a gas generator, like, if you're living, okay, if you're in an apartment, you probably can't have a generator, okay? So you kind of think about that. When I lived on Guam, there was tree snakes that would crawl up, get in the power lines, and knock out power. That happened often. So we were kind of aware of that. If you're like, when I lived in Spokane, Washington, they had the ice storms where a lot of the power lines had so much ice build up on them that they just broke. Okay. So there was huge parts of the city that didn't have power for a while. So if your main source of electricity, or if your main source of heat was your electric heater and you lost electricity, you were in trouble. Okay. So if you had a way to have some kind of alternate heat, for instance, so you look at power. Power can be used for lighting. It can be used for heat. It can be used for cooking. It could be running your laptop. Okay, so you start thinking, okay, if heat uses so much power, maybe you shift heat over to propane, because a little propane tank can last you quite a while. And it's easy to go buy another propane tank as long as you got it ahead of time. If everybody else also needs propane, you're going to have a hard time getting it. So you just kind of think about that. But if you looked at my idea in the beginning of 72 hours, if you can make it through the first 3 days, that might be enough for things to get back to normal. After that, you got to get more serious. Okay. So that's basically it for power. If you had a little bit of light, if you could run your radio, if you could run your laptop, maybe internet still works, or cell phones are still working, so you could recharge your phone, get on the internet that way, right? Shelter. Again, if you're staying at home, you're probably in your home, so you got shelter, okay? Unless there was like a major storm and your roof blew off. That happens, all right? Everybody knows that watches these videos how much I hate tarps, but if you had a tarp, maybe you could fill the hole in the roof. Okay, something like that, right? If you're in the car, your body heat will eventually keep the car warm, or it's at least better than being outside in the cold. The car also gives you shade, okay? So if it's in the summer and you're broken down in the desert, you could sit in the car with the doors open, have the breeze blow through, and you're probably better off than sitting outside in the sun. You got some shade. Or you could sit next to the car in the shade. Okay, so you'd have some shelter from that. A tent or an awning or a tarp or any of that would give you some shelter. And, it protects you from some of the elements. That just makes it more comfortable. Okay. Heat, I talked about a little bit. A propane heater is actually pretty practical. You could get away with running a small propane heater in a house for a while. Crack the window a little bit so you let some fresh air in so you don't die of carbon monoxide. Just make sure you don't start the carpet on fire. You could probably get that to work and you wouldn't die of hypothermia. Okay. Part of that is fuel. If you have a propane heater and a propane stove, that gives you a lot of options. And then you just need enough tanks of propane to last through as long as you need. Okay. If you had a gas generator or a diesel generator, or some generators run on propane. So as long as you had enough, whatever the fuel is, that would keep you going. Or you could get like a little butane stove. They use the little aerosol cans of fuel. You can cook a lot of oatmeal on a butane stove out of that one little canister. I've done that quite a bit. When I was truck camping, I started using the butane stove because the one I had was smaller than the propane stove I had. Okay. Power could be a battery pack. Oh, also for the for your cell phone, if you had one of those little solar rechargeable battery packs to run your phone, that's something. Okay, that works actually pretty good. I've got a few of those. Also, just the regular little battery packs for your phone. If you have several of them, if they're already charged, throw them in your bug out bag. Then, let's say, for instance, you evacuated and you're sitting at a Red Cross shelter. Okay, they give you a bed and a blanket, and they might give you some food. A little bird just landed right next to me. It's funny how nature comes right up to you if you're quiet. Okay, off he goes. All right. If you're sitting at like a shelter, they're going to give you the basics. They'll give you the bed, a blanket, probably some coffee when you get there, and then, hopefully there's some kind of food of some sort. But you're on your own. And if you're not used to sitting still with nothing to do, you're going to go, just bonkers, all right? Well, if you had your phone, at least you could do something. You could sit there on Facebook and tell everybody that you were going bonkers. Okay, but then your phone goes dead. Well, if you had a battery pack, now you've at least given yourself another day on your phone. Okay, and with any luck, maybe you brought your charger with you, so in addition to charging your phone, you could recharge the battery pack. Then you didn't have to sit next to the only plug-in in the shelter and recharge your phone. So that's something. Power, shelter, heat, fuel. Okay, I think we got that covered. Phone and the charger. Okay. Radio. If you have a car, you can probably use the radio in the car. Okay. Even if the road is washed out, I could go, when I had my truck, I honestly don't know if I have radio reception out here. I don't listen to the radio very much. And I'm so close to the border, I could probably get a Spanish station, but that wouldn't do me any good because I don't speak Spanish. But if there was another flood storm coming, it would be good to know that. So, and you could just listen to the radio for some kind of entertainment. It gives you a distraction. Okay. And, when I think radio, I would also probably just throw in a CD player so that, I have a little boom box that I could listen to music on, and that just helps pass the time. Now, if that had batteries, it would be good to have spare batteries for it. And then you'd need enough discipline to think, okay, are we going to listen to this thing until the batteries run dead, or do we turn it on once an hour, listen to the news and the weather, and turn it off again? Okay. If you could solar recharge that, all the better. Internet. In addition to the radio for news, if you could just jump on the internet and do a quick Google search, pull up a weather map, see what's going on. If you saw the big red angry cloud coming in your direction, you'd know you had trouble. Okay. Also, you could go on, Facebook, or you could send email to your friends and let them know that you're alive, but you're stuck. You can't make it out, but you're okay, so they don't worry. And internet, that's good for entertainment too. So you could use that as a way to keep your kids distracted for a while. It's funny, I put food so far down the list. I guess I'm used to living off grid, so I put power at the top. All right, food and water. You'll hear different numbers, but if you had a gallon of water per day for each person, that's a pretty good start. Okay. Now, a gallon of water is heavy. It's like, 8 pounds to a gallon or something like that. All right. So that's something that if you were going to actually bug out and go somewhere, you'd have to think about, could you carry that? Or would you want to make a little wagon or something, There's a survival tip for you. Next time you're going by a yard sale and you see somebody's little red wagon, you might want to grab that. Hadn't thought of it that way, but man, would that be handy. You could throw all your backpacks in the wagon, or put your kids in the wagon, and now when you're evacuating like a bunch of refugees, you'd be styling. That'd be the best thing ever. And I got to think, all of those pictures we've seen for the last, most of my lifetime, you always see refugees and they're all walking, right? Granted, the people in Africa, when they had the famines and they were all walking, or there was the storms or the wars or whatever, maybe that was the best they could do. But there's enough times where stuff happens and you have a large population that isn't used to needing to drive very far. Oatmeal, easy to cook. Makes a difference. Yeah, it's like, okay, Hurricane Katrina again in New Orleans. There was a lot of people that didn't have cars or didn't have money to drive their cars very far, or that lived in apartments and rode the bus to work kind of thing. I mean, when I lived in Seattle, I sold my car because parking was so expensive and I didn't really need it. All right. So you get half of the world that's used to, it's like, oh, I'll just jump in my car. If the car doesn't run, I'll jump in my truck, or my motorcycle, or, And then you got not a small part of the population that relies on public transportation. Well, public transportation isn't necessarily set up to get you to the next city efficiently in some parts of the country or the world, right? That was something they talked about in Hurricane Katrina. There was all these people stuck on the roofs or standing on overpasses trying to get up out of the flood that had no way to get out of town. And there was the entire school district, every single one of their school buses was sitting there underwater. And somebody was like, oh, why didn't they just say, hey, you know what, we've got these school buses, let's just load them up with people and drive out of town. So in hindsight, you look at that, you're like, that would have been smart. As it was, all of their school buses were underwater and they ended up selling them for surplus. That's where so many of those school buses came from. They were water damaged, so they didn't want to put kids in them because of mold, so they sold them to all the preppers, and, we live in them. I've got a school bus. It wasn't from there, but that's kind of the idea. They surplused a whole bunch of buses really cheap and then just bought new ones. Okay. But those buses, if they would have loaded them up with survivors, they could have drove them 100 miles to the next town, put them all in a Motel 6 or whatever, or just turned them loose. Now they're out of the flood zone, right? So transportation is something to think about. But anyway, so you think about food and water, right? What can you carry, or what can you... That's right, I was talking about the little red wagon. I got off on a tangent again. That happens sometimes. Okay. Let's say, for one person, if you had a 6-gallon water jug, and I've got several of them, you buy them at Walmart, when you're at home in your apartment or your house or wherever you live, just have 1 or 2 of those, fill it up, put it in the closet, now you get some water. Okay. Then if the water system is contaminated, that happens. You might come home and there's a big sign on the door, don't use your water. I used to be an apartment manager. That happens sometimes. Or we'd have to shut the water off for maintenance. When the water pressure dropped, all of the scale and scum that was stuck on the inside of all the water lines would come loose. You turn the tap on then and all that would just come running out. And so you'd go fill up your glass of water and it was dark. You're like, hey, you don't want to drink that. Well, what do you do? Well, if you've got 6 gallons of water, that's enough to last you a few days. By then, the water has flushed itself out and maybe you'd be okay. Cool, right? Just simple things like that. If you had, 5 or 6 gallons for each person in your house, that gives you options. Now, you're not going to carry that very far, but if you're stuck at home, you're set. You might go buy a case of bottled water and throw it in the trunk of your car. Okay, that's pretty, plus then if you're going somewhere, you've got water anyway, you're not thinking about it. But, if you're broken down, it is nice on a hot day when you're having a hard time concentrating, if you can just stop, get in the shade, grab a bottle of water, drink it, that kind of gets your brain to reset. Okay, that just helps a little bit, right? Food, same thing. If we're only looking at 3 or 4 days, okay, what would that mean? I mean, for me, because I live off grid anyway, when I buy something like rice and beans, I buy the biggest bag I can. Okay, so I've got 20 pounds of rice or 20 pounds of beans. If I've got enough propane for my stove or enough solar electricity for my electric hot plate, or now I've got a slow cooker and a rice cooker, okay, I've got enough solar, I can cook beans and rice. Great, right? But I can still do it on propane if I need to. Okay, so I got 2 or 3 options there. Okay. Also, if you live in an apartment, right? Obviously, solar isn't real practical if you live in an apartment. If you had gas appliances and there was an earthquake, you don't want to be running your gas appliances, okay? So now you got a problem. It's like you're sitting there, maybe you're sheltered in place, maybe the whole city is half destroyed, things are really messed up. You're doing the best you can. Well, you know you shouldn't use the gas. Do you have anything electric? Maybe the electricity still works, right? So you could, I've seen people do this where you heat up water in your coffee maker and use that to put on your ramen noodles so you can, cook them, and then you could eat that. Okay, that kind of thing. Or, maybe you just ignore all that. My favorite is Cliff Bars. That would be a good sponsorship opportunity if I ever got those guys. I could, if you're just like stuck and you're hungry, it's hard to concentrate. But if you had a Cliff Bar that you could pull out of your backpack, that gives you another hour. You're fine. Now you can think about the next thing. But if you're really hungry, it's hard to think. So if you had a bottle of water and a Cliff Bar, your life just got better, at least for the next hour. That gives you time to think, and then you can figure out a better plan. Okay. If you have canned food, you better have a can opener in your backpack. All right? Yeah, that's just, you know that, right? Now a lot of the cans are just, pop the top and you're good. So, if you're buying soup, especially for your emergency kit, try to get at least some of them that you can just pop the top off, and then you give, save the ones you need the can opener for later, But that's, the military MREs, meals ready to eat. You don't have to cook them. They're pre-cooked. You could just open the bag or open the container and eat it right out of the container. I think they even probably still have spoons in the kit, right? So you just open up the kit. Okay, you grab yourself some beef stew, eat it right out of the bag. You're fine. Okay, if you have a fire, you can warm it up a little bit. That makes it better, all right? But if you think about it like that, one, if you're walking down the side of the road with your backpack and you got your kids in the little red wagon, wouldn't it be great if you could just pull a little snack out of the side pocket and give it to the kids and eat one for yourself and keep walking, instead of thinking, well, okay, we've got all this food, but we have to cook it. That's no good. You can't, it's worthless. You don't have time to stop and eat it, but you really need something to eat. Okay. So if you had, you could have 3 or 4 days worth of Cliff Bars and a case of bottled water. That would get you through. Okay. Now, if you could add things into it, great. Right. I talked about oatmeal. I eat oatmeal pretty much every day. It's dry. It doesn't weigh very much. Add water, cook it. You're fine. You can boil the water, make the oatmeal, good to go. All right. Something I don't talk about much out here, but if you're limited water, especially short term, do you want to be wasting your water washing your dishes? Right? So somewhere in your kit, if you might have a little canteen kit or something where you've got, your little camping bowl and cup and spoon and fork. Okay. Well, you still should probably wash that. All right. But if you had, neighbors driving by. One neighbor, better wave. Anyway, if you had like just simple paper plates, or disposable plates and bowls and whatever, right? for that 1 week where you don't have power and you don't have water, at least then you're not wasting drinking water washing your dishes. Okay. Yeah, we're destroying the environment, with our paper plates or our styrofoam or whatever, but, let's figure out short term first. I mean, don't do it all the time, but, you can make some adjustments for short term. Okay. That's the basics of food and water. I mean, when I'm bicycling, I've got a Camelback. It's a backpack water pouch that holds, I think it's 2 liters. Okay. And some of the backpacks you can buy have a pocket for that. So that might be something to think about. Don't leave it full of water, but if you had fresh water to put in it when you're leaving, open up a couple bottles of water, pour it into your backpack. That's just nice because then you're not carrying a bottle of water. It's just, you pull the straw over your pocket and you can drink when you're walking. It's kind of, it's a kind of a bonus thing, but it is pretty handy. All right. In addition to water, if you had lemonade, Gatorade, hot chocolate mix, coffee, some of the things that you might like to have anyway, that just makes it a little bit better. Also, water purification, we could talk about that a little bit. If you were in a situation, like for instance, maybe the water was still coming out the tap, but you weren't sure if it was any good. If you could run it through a Brita filter, that's not necessarily going to make it safe to drink, but it's going to make it better. If you had like a Sawyer filter, or there's some other ones I can't think of off the top of my head, but there is water purification systems that you could run tap water through to take out some of the contamination. You could also boil the water if you really weren't sure. Boil it for, a few minutes. That'll kill everything that's in it. And then you let it cool off. So if you had some way to make a fire, you could boil the water. But some kind of a water filter would let you maybe use water that wasn't bottled, but still would probably be okay with a filter. And then you'd save your bottled water for later, so you can extend it a little bit. Okay. I think that's it for water. Okay, I talked a little bit about entertainment and books. If you're stuck at a Red Cross shelter and you had a book, that'll take care of a few hours, depending how fast you read. And if everybody in your family had a book, or everybody in your group had a book, or if you had a few books, maybe you guys could trade, right? That would be great. I mean, honestly, if this is the thing is, the whole purpose of this video is 72 hours. I'm not talking about going out and rebuilding civilization. You don't have to spend the first week digging and building. Maybe if you just wait a few days, things will get back to the way they were. All right. That'd be a whole new video series right there, how to rebuild civilization. I might come back to that. But yeah, it's like if you get your, I'm going to go old school. If you get your Walkman, okay, that was always the thing. Well, if you had a Walkman and enough batteries, right, we're still good. Okay, looking right at the sun, can't see anything. Okay, so, you got your Walkman, you got your batteries, a whole backpack full of tapes. Okay, now you got your phone. As long as you can recharge your phone. Oh, this would be a good thing to have. Maybe you don't usually do this, but if you're listening to music on your phone and you're stuck at the shelter, it might be polite if you put your headphones on, right? Unless you just happen to have music everybody likes, then they might appreciate it if you, turned it up a little bit and everybody could listen to it. All right. And maybe that's an idea. You're the guy that had the music and you've got a battery pack. So if you could, go off in one corner and everybody could drag their cot over there and you could all listen to music. And then when your battery is dead, maybe somebody else would play theirs for a while. Okay. And this goes back to the internet again. If odds are not everything quit working, right? So maybe your cell phone still works. Maybe you can get internet on the phone as long as you had enough power, right? Now, if you're going completely off-grid, I've got a cell phone booster, but that's not something that's portable. I couldn't really take that with me somewhere, right, the way it is now. If you had a cell phone booster in your car, that is an option, though. The cell phone booster could, get the cell phone to work. Your cell phone could then share its internet hotspot, learn how to do that. Then your laptop and your tablet could have internet. So your one phone could be giving you, I think, typically 5 connections, something like that. So you could have your phone connected to the cell phone booster. I mean, not wired together, but your booster could be giving you internet. You could be sharing Wi-Fi. Your kids could be on their tablets using the Wi-Fi coming off your phone. So take some time to figure out how that works, because maybe your router doesn't work at home, but your cell phone still does. Okay, so now you can do that. Books, entertainment. Think of, just a distraction that would take care of a few hours. You could sit there and play solitaire on your phone until your phone goes dead. All right. So under entertainment, maybe you could also put a little asterisk, battery pack for phone and phone charger. Right. And if all of that, if you looked at, your bug out bag, a regular backpack, you could have a couple battery packs for your phone. You'd have your phone charger. So buy a spare phone charger, throw it in your backpack, because you're probably going to remember your phone, but you maybe wouldn't remember to grab a backpack when you're running out the house because the fire is coming. Okay. Heat, sterno cans, little cans of jellied alcohol fuel or something like that. Doesn't take up very much room. You could throw that in your backpack and you could probably boil water with that. That's something. Okay. If it's 40 below, that's not enough to keep you warm. But if you could have a hot chocolate before you crawl in your sleeping bag, that might be okay. Sleeping bag and tent. I didn't specifically say that on here. You could have a lightweight sleeping bag and a Mylar space blanket and a backpacking tent wouldn't take up very much room in your backpack. Okay, so that might be something to think about. You could get into a spot where you are sheltered from the wind, get under an overpass or next to a building, curl up in your sleeping bag, get out of the wind, and you'd be better off than if you didn't have it. It's not the best solution, but it's something, right? So you just kind of think about that. What could you carry, and how far do you want to carry it? This isn't for everybody, but because I do bicycle a lot, I know that in 24 hours I can cover 100 miles because I've done it. I wasn't worth much the next couple of days after that. But if I was a little bit ahead of the curve, the trailer I have now worked pretty well. Okay. As long as you get coffee and oatmeal, everything's fine. I'm not necessarily saying go out and do this exactly, but be aware of what you can do, maybe your limitations, right? If you have an office job and you don't do anything physical and you don't go out hiking regularly and you don't own a bicycle, or, odds are the idea that you could walk 20 miles in a day, maybe that wouldn't work out so well, right? Because I live out here and I do walk around my property quite a bit and I do bicycle, that's 15 miles to town. I do that once in a while to bring my groceries in. Okay. My situation is a little bit different. Okay. But there was a few years ago, I broke a chain on my motorcycle on the way home from work. Spent the night in a truck stop waiting for roadside assistance to get me a tow truck or something to get me home. I was less than 100 miles from home. So by the rules or the contract or the guidelines or whatever, roadside assistance would reimburse the tow truck for getting me home up to 100 miles. And so I was within 100 miles. Okay. The nice lady on the phone could not find me a tow truck that would bring me home. Not sure why. Possibly because of where I lived. It was off the highway. But still, it was within miles, So we thought at first it was just because it was middle of the night, because I worked a shift where I got off at midnight or something like that. So ended up catching a ride with a sheriff's deputy back into the truck stop, so I wasn't sitting on the side of the road. Spent the night in the truck stop, bought a cell phone charger at the truck stop, and then camped in the corner and was able to recharge my phone and screw around on Facebook for a while. Because I was on my way home from work. I wasn't expecting to be camping on the side of the road for a while. Next morning, called roadside again. They found my file, knew where I was. Okay, everything's good. Spent a little bit more time. No roadside assistance units were available that would take me home. Sorry. Okay. Now what do you do, right? So I go around, pester people at the gas pumps for a while, ask if anybody can give me a ride to the next town where I lived. I think it was 50 miles from home. No, I was about 70 miles from home then. So it was a ways, but 2 or 3 stops away. No, nobody wants to talk to me. Okay, fine. Try to be polite, Talk to a few truck drivers. This is the thing now, is most trucking companies have a policy, no hitchhikers. They can't stop. They're not allowed to. Okay, I understand. All right, that's not going to work. So I think about it a little bit. I'm like, well, I can't fix the bike. I don't have a spare part, master link, I guess. Or I can't remember if I just needed a master link or if I actually broke something that time. Anyway, so I couldn't fix the bike with what I had. I did have a truck at home, so my idea was if I could get home, get the truck, come back, get the motorcycle, get to work. Okay. All right, sitting in the truck stop isn't doing me any good. It's not getting me any closer, and roadside assistance wasn't really working. I didn't really have any other options. I didn't have a wide circle of friends that had pickups, that kind of thing. Didn't have anybody's number out here, and I don't usually get people's number because my phone didn't work out here. Okay. So I'm like, well, what am I going to do? Right? Okay. Well, let me just start walking, A, I could catch a ride on the side of the road, very unlikely on a freeway. B, at least I'm getting closer. Okay. So I walked from Fabens to Fort Hancock on the freeway in the summer, carrying some of my motorcycle riding gear. I left the helmet locked to the motorcycle, but I didn't have any way. I had a jacket and pants, riding gear. So I carried that for 20 miles from about sunrise to sunset. All right. Slept, actually, yeah, because I worked for the Postal Service. I just walked to the post office in Fort Hancock. I was hoping I could catch a ride with the mail delivery truck that goes between the plant and all the post offices. That seemed like a good idea. I was still in my uniform. I had my postal shirt on. But the truck was a private contractor, and he was nervous about taking a hitchhiker. So I'm like, all right, probably scared the crap out of him at 3 o'clock in the morning when he came rolling up and I'm sleeping there, leaned up against the post office. So that didn't work. That would have got me the last 40 miles home, right? So that didn't work. So I'm like, all right, next day, I get to the gas station in Fort Hancock, and again, I just start politely pestering everybody I could see. And eventually, it being a smaller town, by this time I'm looking a little bit rougher, so I wasn't exactly, super presentable, but, I just walked 20 miles across the desert the day before, so I was looking kind of rough. But anyway, I ended up talking to a guy. Hey, can I, are you going towards, Sierra Blanca? Yeah. Hey, can I catch a ride? Hey, I work for the post office. My motorcycle broke down. I give him the whole song and dance. I'm not some homeless guy. I actually have a job. I just have to get to it before I get fired, right? Anyway, long story short, longer. The whole idea was I was able to walk 20 miles in the summer through the desert, okay? So maybe the question is that an option for you? Is that something that you could do if you're not physically able to walk, okay, then you would know that, okay? Then you need to make some different choices. If you live on the coast where hurricanes and flooding are a possibility, you might think about how are you going to get away. Transportation. This I learned from talking to some of the people I talked to after Hurricane Katrina. Are you able, in addition to 72 hours, if you can shelter in place, that's your best option. You know, if the road washed out but you're otherwise okay, do you have enough food and water to survive for 3 days? Great. If you could shelter in place and be fine, that's a lot simpler. You're already at home, right? If you're in your car and you break down, say if you're driving through a mountain pass and you're in an avalanche and you're stuck in your car. Okay, not a very good situation, but it happens. Or you just hit the ditch and nobody sees you for a few days until the snow melts. Okay. Or you can't walk out for some reason. All right. And I'm pretty much ignoring massive injuries. That's a whole nother subject. But if you broke your leg and you're stuck in your car and you can't get out, that's a whole different situation. So I'm not going to go there. But the people that I talked to from Hurricane Katrina, you know, there was people that had a functioning car that were able to drive from New Orleans up to, I was in Memphis for a while, so I talked to a lot of people in Memphis. The people that had a little bit more money or resources were able to get up far enough away from the coast, stay in a hotel, and then they were able to get some Red Cross vouchers to help reimburse the cost of the hotels. That worked out pretty good for everybody. Okay. If you didn't have enough, so then I talked to one lady had just bought a car. It was used. She didn't know a lot of the history on it. This car ends up not doing very well. So she's trying to get out of town, ends up breaking down. Right? There actually was two different people. Well, the two girls, if you actually watch the videos, there's two younger girls. They were sisters. They're in a pretty nice vehicle. And it was getting vapor locks. It was hot. They had never driven this thing a long distance. The truck would get hot. I think it was like a Suburban or something like that. The thing starts getting vapor locks when they're driving, and it just quits running. It's like it ran out of gas with a full tank. Some cars do that. All right. So here they are on the side of the road, you know. Or you're like I was sometimes, like now, I don't have a vehicle that runs. You know, I could probably get the motorcycle put together if I had to get somewhere in a hurry, or I take the bicycle, right? So what are your options? Just kind of think about if you had to. You know, me, I know if I had to, I could walk to town. It's about 15 miles. I could be there before sunset, more or less. Okay, it's a long walk. But on this road, I wouldn't have to walk more than a couple miles, and one of the neighbors or even Border Patrol has picked me up a couple times, you know, just because they don't want to leave you stuck out here, right? So if you know your area, your neighbors will probably pick you up. If you're on the side of the freeway, very likely nobody will stop because they're scared of getting robbed or whatever. All right, so people don't pick up hitchhikers anymore, okay? In Canada, because it's so cold, you could die on the side of the road. Everybody knows that. You'll have so many people stopping to help you. It's annoying. You know, it's a different environment. When I was on the motorcycle trip, I'd break down with a flat tire. I'm like, I got all the stuff I need. I'll fix it, no problem. Every minute, I'd have to stop. Somebody would stop. How you doing? You doing okay? Yeah, I'm fine. Keep going. You know. Then my air compressor was broken. Didn't have a way to pump up the tire. Then everybody that stopped, nobody had an air compressor. You can't win, right? Anyway, I guess that was what I learned from Hurricane Katrina and watching some of the other news videos that you see and so on. If you had a tornado coming, okay, you would probably if you lived in tornado country, you'd probably have some kind of a storm cellar, or you'd crawl in the bathtub or whatever, right? Tornadoes pop up pretty quick. You don't probably have a chance to jump in your car and drive 50 miles to get away from a tornado. they're pretty fast, right? But if you had a hurricane coming, you would probably know a day or two in advance that, you know what, maybe I want to be 100 miles off of the coast before the hurricane comes. Okay. So if you lived in that zone, you'd be thinking, okay, if I had a couple $100 in the bank for my emergency fund, maybe also a little bit of cash, because that was something that came up a few times. The people in Hurricane Katrina, they had money in the bank. There was no ATMs working in that area. They had no way to get the money out, and the bank was underwater. So you're like, oh, great, you got $4,000 in the bank and you can't buy a Snickers bar because your credit card doesn't work. Nobody had cash. Okay, so I'd be thinking about that. If you were able to evacuate yourself to the next city, odds are you could drive half a tank of gas, get yourself away from whatever was happening. Okay. So you decide it's time to evacuate. You should know, will my car get me to the next city? Okay. Odds are, if your car probably won't make it that far. Okay. So now you make a new plan. All right. And I know, it's like, sometimes you got a car that's not really very reliable. You can't afford it, or you've spent your money on something else. Okay. Not judging. I've been there. Even, if you jumped in your car or your motorcycle or your scooter or your bicycle and you got 50 miles away and you sat there in a tent, you might be better off than if you're stuck at home in the wildfire, in the hurricane, in the earthquake, right? Because, you could have an earthquake. It could knock down like San Francisco when they had the big earthquakes back in the 80s, 90s. I think it was before Desert Storm, so 80s probably. Okay. If you had 2 or 3, or LA earthquakes for that matter too, if you had your major route, if one overpass collapsed, you can't drive through there. Okay. Now maybe you could drive around it, right? There's all these little curveballs, and you can't plan for everything, all right? But if you have something, if you had, a backpack full of bottled water and Cliff Bars and 2 pair of clean underwear and some socks, at the end of the day of walking, if you could rinse your face off and put on clean socks and underwear for the next day, that's just a little bit better than the day before, right? But I think that was part of it. If you got the notice to bug out, if it's time to leave, one, do you have a backpack? Do you have things kind of figured out? And maybe you don't know which direction to go, okay? But sometimes if you just got 100 miles away in any direction, that might be better, right? Oh, one last thing. We're also used to having our phones working for GPS and stuff like that. Different times in my life, I've had good maps or atlases or things like that. I did briefly drive trucks for a couple of weeks. I didn't last very long, but neighbors again. Decided that wasn't my lifestyle, which was weird because I really thought I'd enjoy driving. I like driving. It was just every other part of it I didn't like. So that was a surprise. But so I've got a good trucker's atlas. You don't necessarily need one of them, but if you had a map of your state and maybe the next state, okay, put that in your backpack or have it in your car. All right. We're so used to using our our phones now. I'm going to go to grandma's house. You punch it up on your phone. It gives you turn by turn. Most of us have just completely, that part of our brain that used to navigate, it's just vaporized now. It's stuck in Facebook somewhere. That would be a good thing to have, is just know how to get out of town. You know, I mean, it seems funny, but if you didn't have to think about it, and if you only had an hour, let's say, you know, maybe you got woke up in the middle of the night and you're like, oh, something bad happened. You know, maybe you knew there was a wildfire, but it was a long ways away. And then overnight the winds changed and you get a knock on the door at 4 o'clock in the morning. You guys got to get out. You got 15 minutes, right? Could you do it? Would you have kind of an idea? It's like, yeah, if you could get to the car and you knew the car would run, right? If you knew you could get out of town, that would be better. And then you get, you know, rioting and all that other goofy stuff we're dealing with now. There was something that when I lived on Guam, they talked about. I mentioned the tree snakes earlier. Regularly, you know, several times a year sometimes, the base or the base and the town, the whole island on Guam, would lose power. Just, okay, there's no power. It might be off for a couple of days. Okay. Gas pumps need electricity to work. You go to the gas station, maybe the gas pump doesn't work because there's no power. Huh, right? Or you get to the gas station, they've got power, but the cell phones systems are down. A lot of the card readers use cell phones now, or wired phone connections. All right, so maybe you get to some little town somewhere and it's lost its connection to the rest of the world. Maybe your cell phone isn't, or your credit card isn't going to work. All right. Well, if you had $20 or $40 of cash, you know, I used to always, because I don't smoke, I'd always keep my loose change in the ashtray of my car or my truck. So on a good day, if I had a little bit of money left over, I'd put a 20 in there. And then the next time, if it was 3 days before payday and I needed gas, I knew I always had $20 in there. Okay, that kind of thing, right? Yeah, there ain't nothing more annoying than knowing that you got $4,000 in the bank and you can't spend it. That just kills you. It doesn't happen to me very often, though. Usually it's the other way around. Anyway, I think... Oh, right. Last thing. What I was talking about Guam. They recommended, because you may not be able to buy gas because the power would be out, make it a habit of refilling your gas tank at about half a tank. Don't run down to the last gallon of your tank and then go refill it, right? Because that way, if something happened and you had to go, when the rest of town is sitting there at the gas station trying to fill up, and you got, 2 miles of cars trying to get gas, you got half a tank. You could maybe make it to the next town before you even had to stop and fill up, all right? And I mentioned fuel. When I had a pickup, I usually kept a gas can in the back of the pickup. Just nice to have an extra couple gallons of gas. If you did happen to get stupid and you ran out of gas, well, you just put another gallon in, and then you could get to the next off-ramp and buy some gas. Or, if you saw somebody broken down, if they ran out of gas, you could probably just help them out, right? Plus, it was good for the generators, So when I was going into town all the time, I just would always make sure that my empty gas can for the generator was in the back of the truck, and then I'd remember to fill it up, And I had a siphon kit, so I could siphon some gas out of the truck to fill up the generator, or I could. When I first brought the bus out here, I siphoned most of the gas out of the bus to run the generator because the bus wasn't going to go anywhere. So that's kind of a handy thing to have. But I guess the idea is don't be sitting there with your car empty if you can help it. Because that one time where it's like, hey, I could jump in my car and I could drive 100 miles before I even had to stop for gas. That might make a difference. It's kind of mindset, I guess. So if in your car you had a backpack and a case of bottled water and some Cliff Bars and an old pair of jeans you don't necessarily need all the time, couple shirts, t-shirts, underwear, socks, right? Maybe a space blanket, or next time you're at a yard sale, you see they're selling their old blankets. Buy them, throw them in the back of the car. Might be useful someday. You could, even on a hot day, you could rig it up for shade, right? And then you get into, have some bungees, have a tarp if you like tarps, that kind of thing, right? But just think about it. It's like, okay, wherever you are, in the world, in your life right now, we're in lockdown, so you got time to think about it maybe. You think, okay, right now, do I have enough food and water for the next 3 days where I wouldn't have to go somewhere to get it? Okay. And then you start looking around. It's like, okay, if my house burned down right now, what would I do? Where would I go? Do I have some kind of a plan? Hopefully, if my house burns down, the bus didn't catch on fire. I just moved back to the bus. You could sleep in your car a few days if you had a car. I don't anymore, but that kind of thing. You just think, it's like, okay, if you lose power, what are you going to do? Is it a big deal? Some people it is, What is that thing called? The CPAP, something like that, the thing that helps you breathe when you're sleeping, right? I've known people that use those. Well, if you lose power, that thing isn't going to work. So you need some kind of way to keep that going. Figure out how much power does it use? How long could you run it? If you bought something like the Blue Eddy, it's about $1,000, but maybe that would be enough to run that for a couple of days. That might keep you alive, Do you need coffee in the morning? Well, if you watch this channel, you probably do. I've got probably 4 different ways I can make coffee if I needed to, And if it really got bad, I'd go around and start burning old bushes. But I haven't got to that point yet. But, I've got propane stove, butane stove, got the little canned heat plus electric. So if solar worked, I could do it with electric. And then if my coffee maker itself quits working, I've got the French press. That's another useful thing, So anyway, this was going to be another short video. You know how that goes. Still running? Hey, look at that. We're at the end. Okay. Hopefully, you get some kind of ideas out of this that would get you through, right? And that's kind of the point, is we're not going to rebuild civilization from here, but there is a lot of times where if you could make it through the next 72 hours, life will get back to normal, or it'll give you time to think of a better way. That's a lot of it. You got this thing happens, your whole day is disrupted. Maybe it's just you. Maybe everybody else is fine, but just you. Your power gets shut off because you forgot to pay the bill. Been there, and it's 3 days till payday. Well, could you live without power for 3 days? Maybe that's all you need. You just like, oh, fine, hope you don't have too much meat in the freezer that's going to melt, You just suffer through it and you get through it, Or you find out that, you have to evacuate. Is that even an option? Or are you going to be forced to hunker down because, you made other choices that month and you don't have enough money to evacuate? That's life, Anyway, hopefully that triggers a couple ideas for you, and everybody's going to have their own situations. So I would say, if you got stories or comments, hit me up in the comments. Share your tips. If you got links to other people's videos or something like that, odds are in 3 hours I still missed something. So go ahead and hit me up on that. And if you think this would help somebody, go ahead and click on share if you want. Post it on your Facebook groups or whatever. Or if you're new to the channel, hey, check out the subscribe button if you'd like to help keep things going out here. I've got a Patreon link and a PayPal. Look for the contact links. Anyway, that's it for now, I guess. Be ready it might get worse before it gets better. Depends how things go. Help each other out. Be good to each other. Stay safe. Bye for now. And cut. Coffee. I don't know why I script these things. It's going to be short, right? All right, back to writing the books.